Hello, I'm Joe Ruggiero, and welcome to my podcast, Inspired, and the people who inspire me. Well, here we are at the beautiful Calabasas Country Club, and I have a guest today that's got a lot to say. So I don't want to give him any introductions. I want him to give his own introductions, but it gives me great pleasure to introduce Reggie Scully.
Thank you, Joe.
Now, your dad was a contract player for MGM, and I want to know what it was like growing up as a kid in Hollywood.
I would love to say I grew up in Hollywood. I brushed a lot of elbows with a lot of people, but I wasn't in that era. He was from 1944. I was born in 54. So I wish I could comment on that. The only thing I can remember in detail was sitting at the TV with the whole family watching Dad in Meet Me in St. Louis.
Now, he was Warren Sheffield in that movie, for those of you who aren't familiar with the movie, and that was Judy Garland's sister's boyfriend, who became her fiancé and eventually her husband.
Yes, and we always waited for his two big parts, which was when in the beginning and in the end when he wanted to propose to her.
But you have a funny story when you saw him get his accolades with the paparazzi or autograph hounds. Or
yes, when I was growing up, I was with a firm, and we did high-end security for a lot of different celebrities. And so I got to know the paparazzi and the autograph hounds. And so Mom and Dad and I and my sister Adrian were at Spago. We had gone there. It was a big treat. And we came out, and I saw all the paparazzi, all my friends who I work with. And I said, hey, you know, my dad's here. And they said, oh, my God, is he really? And I said, yes. He said, can we talk to him? I said, sure. I said, Dad, this is Steve and John and Bill and Harry. And he sat down on the wall, and he was like a peacock. He fluffed up all his feathers, and my sister and I said, we looked over, and we said, look at Dad. He's like a little peacock. And he was just as...
And he deserved it.
He deserved it.
He really
yes.
did.
Yes, he did.
Now, you also have an interesting story about the famous interior designer for the stars, designer for motion pictures, many, Cedric Gibbons, and his wife.
Yes, Cedric Gibbons and Hazel were very close friends of my parents. And years later, when I was doing miscellaneous jobs around the neighborhood, I would go over to Hazel. She would call me, and she'd say, she called me little boy, we need this done, and that done, and this done. And I used to say to her, may I go see the boys? And she'd say, sure. Well, in her living room, on a high shelf, were in a row, not prominently displayed, were 11 Oscars.
Wow.
And Hazel used to ask me, Reggie, why do you care about those? They're not mine. What is your intrigue? And I said, Hazel, no one has 11 Oscars.
But you have a funny story about how you rescued them.
Yes. Making a very long story short, a nurse called me one night and said that Hazel was not doing well, and I got through to her doctor, and he came up immediately, and she was checked into St. John's, and then I thought in my head, there's no alarm system, there's no guards, there's no one in that house, and the 11 Oscars were there. So I broke into the house through a window or something, and I grabbed all 11 Oscars, hid them in a closet, and then, fortunately, when she returned, she said, little boy, where are the Oscars? And put them, and they were put back up on the shelf.
And they now belong to the Academy.
Yes. Upon her death, the executor told me, I said, what happened to the Oscars? Of course, I had that selfish side of me saying she was going to give me one because I was so intrigued. I asked him what happened, and he said, we called the Academy and said, take everything you need. And so they're down with the Academy now.
Now, you have always been handy.
Yes, sir.
That was inherited. You could fix things, build things.
Yes.
You really were an amazing kid.
I enjoyed it. My dad basically trained me of construction, and I grew up, I'm not a big sports fan because it was always either getting into adventures or going and fixing things. So years ago, we put a letter in everybody's mailbox, and we said, my name is Reggie Scully, I live in the area, and I know how to do a lot of things, and I charge $2.50 per hour.
in those days.
Yes, and it was a wide variety. It was bartending, it was fixing somebody's door, it was chauffeuring, it was driving cars across the country. The variety was so wide, and I loved every minute. I learned so much.
Now, you have a history with the famous Beverly Hillbillies mansion.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you were involved?
In the very beginning, I was part of that, the working crew that I would, excuse me, I'm stuttering here. In the very beginning, I knew Mrs. Kirkaby, Carlotta Kirkaby, who was the owner of the house, and I took care of anything she had in the house. So the house and I were, it sounds odd, but the house and I were very much soulmates. We were very, very close because of that association in the beginning. Then later, I worked for a client, and he did an entire remodel on the house, gutted it down to nothing, and I was part of the company that rebuilt it. And then later, we remodeled it again. And during the time that I worked on it for this client who did the extensive remodel, I became fascinated with the history of it. There was rumors that the owner of the house, a man named Lynn and Bernice Atkinson, who built it, there was a rumor that she was brought to the house after it was completed, and it was a surprise. She didn't know that it was her house. And she walked in and she said, "This is the gaudiest house I've ever seen, and I would never want to ever live here." He never told her, and they never lived in it. Well, the side story to that I found out through my research was, yes, it was, it was not a surprise. The architects who I interviewed, two of the original architects who worked for Sumner Spalding, John Rex and Randall Duell, they said she was in the meetings, Reggie. The part about not living in the house was partially accurate because there was a taxation. Back then, they had a house in Hancock Park and they had a house in Bel Air. So you couldn't live in both houses. So from what I learned, it was only used on weekends.
Now, it is considered the Versailles of Beverly Hills to this day.
Yes.
And it has been beautifully maintained. I guess some of the credit has to go to you and your construction company.
Yes, McCoy Construction, Peter McCoy, the owner of our company, we were responsible for 2 remodels on it, for a man when he did the extensive remodel, and then recently when he had passed away, the new owners bought it and they brought us back on. And a very quick side story in regards to the house and I were soulmates, if you want to call it. The man who originally bought it and died, just before he died, he talked to his house manager. And he said to him, "Please take care of her. She's a grand old dam."
Yeah, absolutely.
So the house and I have a great amount of history together. I want to call it she, but a lot of history and stories were revealed to me. It was like she was sharing things that no other people knew.
Well, the gardens alone are spectacular.
13 acres.
Yes, really beautiful.
Yes.
Now, also, you have some history with a wonderful, wonderful lady by the name of Betsy Bloomingdale.
Yes, very close association with Betsy.
And she was probably the most elegant dresser, but also entertainer. And I would love to, because one of our interests of our listeners is food. I'd like to talk a little bit about, because you went to many of the dinner parties that she threw.
I was honored to be invited to, generally I was there, I lived with her, I lived in the guest house, I rented the guest house from her for 20 years. So we became very, very close. I wasn't just the guy next door, no, we were very, very close friends. And she was, what you say, Joe, unbelievable. Her class, her look, her elegance, her kindness, everything.
Table settings, fabulous.
The table settings were unbelievable. I'd walk into the house one day, because I had free reign of the house, and I'd walk into this gorgeous dining room, and there would be some plates and some napkins and forks laid out in different patterns. And I asked her, I said, "What's this?" She said, "I'm setting up for tomorrow's dinner." So she was very detailed and very articulate on how the table settings were done.
Now, were there hors d'oeuvres? Was there cocktails?
Yes.
Before dinner?
It was a standard protocol. People would arrive. I mean, I didn't have too much of a commute. I just walked across the hall. People would arrive. She would greet them. People would sit in the library, and everybody would have cocktails and drinks in there. And then Betsy would say, "It's time for dinner." We would all walk down the hall. There were name tags, place settings on every single person's table, every single person's seating, and then it would be having dinner at that point. And I proud of my manners, but I had to be extra careful there, sitting with Betsy. A very cute side story. I was talking with my dinner partner next to me, and I had Betsy's eye. I was talking with a person, but Betsy and I could see each other, and all of a sudden this person and I are chatting, and Betsy came with her finger, kept pointing to the person next to me. And 2 or 3 times she would point back and forth, and I just got up and I walked over and I said, "I'm not getting your message." She looked at me and she said, "Reg, you talk 5 minutes to one person and 5 minutes to the other person." But it was always exciting to see being at these dinner parties. It was such an honor.
Were there many courses? Or was it buffet, or was
No,
it served?
it was all served. Everybody was seated, and the waiters and waitresses, if you want to call it, would come in and they would offer you food, and same thing, plates would be picked up afterwards, and then it would go into dessert. And going back to the timing, right after dinner, when Betsy got up, we all got up, and we'd go sit in the living room, and coffee was served, and it was sort of like a relaxation.
Now, we all know that she was best friends with Nancy Reagan.
Yes.
And she, I guess, was considered part of the kitchen cabinet.
I can't say I know that much, but I would assume so. It was exciting if I came home at lunchtime for something and I saw a maroon car in the driveway with 2 men in it, and I'd walk in the house and there would be Betsy and Mrs. Reagan chit-chatting, and I mean, it was a thrill for me, for Mrs. Reagan to say, "Hello, Reggie." And I say, "Hello, Mrs. Reagan."
Well, now the contractor that you're associated with now,
Yes.
Peter McCoy,
Yes, ma'am.
was her...
Peter was Mrs. Reagan's chief of staff,
Uh-huh.
which I got myself into trouble with Peter one day. The phone rang and I answered the phone, and Mrs. Reagan would call periodically to talk to Peter about advice. This is long after he was out of the White House. And I said, she said, is Peter in? And I said, "Who's calling, please?" She said, "Nancy Reagan." I said, "Hello, Nancy." She said, "Hi, Reggie." And I transferred the call. Came down to Peter, and Peter sat back quietly in his chair. And he looked at me, and he crossed his arms, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I know something's wrong. And he said, "You know, Reggie, it was an honor for me to work for President and Mrs. Reagan. And to the day he died, I called him Mr. President, and to this day, I call her Mrs. Reagan. And you call her Nancy?" And I was fortunate. I came back pretty fast, and I said, "Peter, we just have a different relationship."
R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Now, let's talk a little bit about the projects that you're involved with
Yes, sir.
today. You have sometimes... The project might be a big multi-million-dollar mansion.
Yes, sir.
100,000 square feet, perhaps.
Yes, our largest homes that come to mind are 100,000 square feet and 2 80,000 square foot homes.
Now, what's it like managing the crews for those projects?
It's a real challenge. The project managers that Peter will assign to them they just know everything, and it's a lot of coordination, it's a lot of problem solving, it's a lot of scheduling, it's a lot of being proactive, which is what we're known for, is detail, quality, anything to do with luxury homes. That's what our forte is. Uh-huh. Very, very high-end homes. I remember one job, 3 jobs, we were averaging 150 to 250 people a day. Yikes. On that job. And I always was so thinking ahead that it's not only the 250 people we're employing, we're employing the man in Wisconsin building the elevator motor.
That's right.
Or the woman in Arizona building the air conditioning units, or whatever. The trickle-down effect and how it affects economy is unbelievable. And that 250 men are on the job site, plus all those people throughout the country. We're not even talking about all the fabricators in Europe building the stone, carving the stone. All of that helps the economy immensely.
Now, I know that you cannot mention some of the celebrities that you
Sure.
have worked with, but do you work directly with the celebrity, or do you work with their representative, or?
Good answer. I did a job with a very prominent celebrity where I dealt with that person one-on-one.
Oh,
It was one-on-one. You can also be dealing with what we have now called the owner will hire an owner's representative, and that's a person who understands construction, and they basically manage the job. They report to the owner. So, and at the same time, owners come onto jobs all the time. So we'll have both the owner and the owner's rep there directing us what to do.
any difficult problems for clients or with clients?
I would say some clients are more understanding and work with us. I would say some clients can be very, very difficult, and there's a lot of hand-holding and a lot more detail in explaining what they're getting. Example, a client picks a tile, the architect, the designer pick a tile, and they sign it, and that's what we call a control sample. We then install it. They walk in and they said, "That's not what I chose. That's not the color, or that's not the sample." We did a house for a client, very, very large house, and the color was approved and almost finished. I was the project manager on the job. Peter got a call from the designer. "I'm sorry, Peter, the owner is not so sure of the color." And so what happened? They decided to put some stripes on the house. So we put some horizontal and vertical stripes on the house to break down that color. So we get challenges, and we try and see these ahead of time as much as we can to be proactive. But things come up, and best answer for us is we come up with solutions.
Well, you are familiar with the movie Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House.
Okay?
With Cary Grant.
Got it.
And of course, one of the most funny scenes I've ever seen was, I believe it was Myrna Loy, where she tries to explain to the painter what color she wants. And she spends details with petals from flowers and colors of birds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Only for the end of the conversation, he says, "Pete, give me a 125 over a 133. It was one of these funny things. So I imagine you have to put up with the foibles of your clients.
We do, and we do our best not to give any surprises. We want them to know in advance. We did do one very, very large house where we were on the job, almost ready to sign the contract, and another contractor got the job.
Wow.
And that was a big, big loss to us. A year later, the owner's assistant called me. Let's call her Susie. "Hey, Reggie, it's Susie. My client would like to talk to Peter." And I thought that was odd because it was a year later, and the other firm was already coming out of the ground, what we call coming out of the ground. Concrete was poured, foundations in. And I said, "I can get Peter." He was traveling somewhere. And I said, "Peter, Susie called regarding Mr. Blank." And Peter said, "Why are they calling?" I said, "Peter, I don't know. I tried to find out." Peter called Mr. Blank, and Mr. Blank said, "You know what, Peter? You gave me a price, and the other contractor gave me a much lower price. Their change orders are coming up to your price. Take over." And we took over.
Exactly.
So we don't like to surprise clients. We want to give everything up front so they know. And we will do what in our terminology called value engineering. The client doesn't want, even though the designer specified, I'm exaggerating here, solid gold hardware, and the budget's $1 million. the client says, my God, I don't want to spend $1 million. We do what's called value engineering. We come back to the client, we said, look, you can have the same look, we can gold plate it. It looks the same, and it's $200,000.
Right.
So I offer that out to a lot of people. But yes, now everything is detail, 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 and that's what we're known for.
Well, you know, Reggie, you have had an incredible life story, and of course it's to be continued. But I think one of the things that our listeners like most, and I've even said this to my producer, we may have to call this series Journeys. How did you get from a little kid that was a handyman to where you are today? What inspired you to achieve what you have achieved?
The first words come to me are, I always like to help, wherever I can help. 2, I'm very much of a problem solver. Whatever problem comes up, I'm not thinking, okay, we can't do this. So if Peter calls me and said, I have something for you, then I have to go into, okay, he can't solve it, I gotta solve it. I have a very close friend, Virginia Fout. Virginia does the Elton John AIDS dinner every year, the Academy
yes,
AIDS dinner.
Familiar with it.
Virginia can solve anything. But when Virginia calls me, I think, okay, it's something. So I never want to let anybody down. So backing up, I was that handyman, fix-it man in the neighborhood. Then I went to Pepperdine, graduated, came out of Pepperdine, and at that point, my father knew a man named Claire Peck, and his company was called C.L. Peck. And I joined with a firm, and I was there 11 years. After that, Peter approached me, and I joined Peter, and I think I've been there, 20, 25 years.
Are you sure you don't have a little bit of Italian in your heritage? Because the Italians have a saying, no problems, only solutions. And I think that's so true, because my son-in-law is a Frenchman, and the French are typical, not possible. They will turn you down immediately, where the Italians will try to offer a solution.
Well, I know that our last name is French. My last name is Sully, but in French it's pronounced Sully.
Oh.
So I must be messing up our heritage, because I more want to solve the problem. And Joe, you have no idea how many people call Peter's clients, friends, okay, solve this, solve that, solve this. So it's I have to say, it's a God-given gift. It's just born into me.
Well, I think especially with events, you know, there's so much that can go wrong, and there's so many what-ifs. And I think that having to manage the construction of a building and have to deal with clients and have to deal with all the workmen and what have you, their specialties, is an amazing thing. It's almost like a conductor conducting the Philharmonic. And I really respect that.
Well, again, I'm termed a project manager. I've done a number of houses for Peter, but then when you get into that 200,000 square foot house, or excuse me, 100,000 square foot house, or that 80,000 square foot house, that's a different league of project managers. Mm-hmm. I got a call this morning on something where somebody knows that I can cut through a lot faster than somebody else with dealing with the politics with the city and the bureaucracy. So I never know each day. I'm honored to be working with Peter, and things come all the time. But I want to say each person has their gift. These project managers handle these bigger homes. They know it. They know when to start, what time the foundations, when's the foundation going in. But it's a process. And as Peter once said to me, a little house is just as complicated as a big house.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you had a very interesting childhood because you were known as the kid, and you helped a lot of people. And I don't know if you can disclose any of the other celebrities that you've worked with.
Ava Gabor was a very close
That's
friend of
right.
my mother's.
Yes.
And
She was your godmother.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so I grew up with Ava. And then when I was supporting myself in my little miscellaneous jobs, her husband, Frank Jameson, said, "Reggie, how'd you like to be our chauffeur?" I said, "Sure." And then when she bought a house on Delfern Drive, which coincidentally I did a lot of work on, and then Betsy's house, I think Ava's house was at 101 and Betsy's house was at 131. So it was quite a coincidence. But working for Ava was exciting. I would chauffeur her, I would chauffeur Frank and Ava, and she was one of the most, she was a lot like Betsy, elegant, but that would be one.
Was she surprised at the success of her series, her television series?
I wish I could remember.
Was it Green Acres?
It was Green Acres, yes.
Yeah. And ran for quite some time.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And when I would go down to the set, I don't know, I was maybe 7 or 8. My mom would take Ava, my mom would take my sister and I, and when I got older, Ava used to say to friends, she'd introduce me, and she said, "Darling, this is my godson, Reggie." And we used to vessel, speaking of wrestle, on the set at Green Acres. Another gentleman who is a great mentor of mine, who I was honored to work for, was a man named Jerry Parentio. And if anybody looks it up, there's Jerry Parentio's Rules of the Road. And if anybody sees these, they're some of the most outstanding advices in life to see. So
Can you give us one or two, or off the top?
Forgive me if I don't say it as accurately
Right.
as Jerry. Suit up like you're going to be playing at Dodger Stadium. Let's see, another one. In business, be tough, be fair, and have fun.
Yeah.
There was one more. It'll come to me. Oh, another one. There's standard in the industry. Do your homework.
Very true.
Which I offer that to you and everybody building a house. Do your homework. Those are some. I mean, again, I thank Peter. Peter was the one that introduced me to Mrs. Bloomingdale. I just went up there to fix something for her, and I came back and I said, "Wow, Peter, Mrs. Bloomingdale. I know she's a friend of my mom's, but that woman is incredible." And it was almost like, I'm not hinting anything, it was almost like a date. We became very, very close from that period on. And when Peter approached me one time and he said, when I told him about coming back, he said, "You know, Reggie, that's the woman I talked to you about, a guest house." And I looked at him and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. McCoy, you didn't tell me that she had a guest house." And he said, "Well, you were fine where you were living." And I said, "Oh, no, not." So that's when I moved in, and I want to thank Peter for that.
Well, you had mentioned Billy Haynes.
Yes.
And he was a legendary designer here in California, in Hollywood, was a former silent screen star, and then with the help of, I think, was it Loretta Young's mother, became an interior designer.
Yes.
Now, did she change any of his original designs, Betsy, in that house?
No, because I remember the house distinctively, and everything was period Billy Haynes.
Didn't he build low to the ground?
That is true. The first thing that comes to mind is that when you walked in the bar where we'd have cocktails, there were about 4 little chairs that you think a child would sit in. And I asked Mrs. Bloomingdale, she was Mrs. B, or I sometimes would call her Mom, Mrs. B or Mrs. Bloomingdale. I said, "Why are these chairs so small?" She said, "Because when you're sitting down at the table, you're at eye length, you're at eye vision with the people on the couch."
Isn't that interesting?
And sorry to interrupt you,
No.
When she passed away, I believe it was Christie's, I hope I've got the right company, took all the furniture and it went to auction in New York. And they actually duplicated a lot of the settings, and I went back to see it. And I remember turning the corner, and there was that dining room table with all the beautiful china, everything on it, and I had tears in my eyes. I was back at 131 Delphine Drive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I have the opportunity, or had the opportunity, of purchasing one of the pieces of furniture that Audrey Hepburn had in her home when she would stay with Connie Wald.
Oh, my
And
God.
Connie actually built a wing for Audrey because Audrey loved to stay there, and they would cook up a storm and what have you. And it's low to the ground, and I was mentioning to a friend of mine, I think that was for her two sons because it was easy for them to get in and out. And he said, oh, no, no, no. In those days, women had these beautiful dresses with crinolines underneath and whatever, and beautiful handiwork, and they wanted to show them off. And he said that's where they would perch. So maybe Billy Haynes was thinking of that.
Very much so, and that's ironic you said that. I didn't bring the name up, but when I had that thing with Betsy telling me about talking to other people at the same time, it was Connie Wald I was speaking to.
Oh, really?
And Connie and I, we just had such great conversations, and after Betsy basically reprimanded me and said, keep talking to the other person, Connie wanted to keep talking to me, so put me in and Andrew Wald and I are very close, and the other son is Robbie.
Well, you know, Connie was known as an excellent cook. And I went through that house, and I was amazed to see that the kitchen wasn't that great. I mean, it was an old stove and this and that, but she would cook up a storm, and she was known for her Thanksgiving feasts, from what I understand. And she developed quite a friendship with Audrey.
Yes, no, Andrew and I are very, very close friends, and he's telling me about how close, and they were just, it was a simple family. And you're right, that kitchen, I remember that kitchen, it wasn't, same with Betsy's kitchen. It was no fancy refrigerators or ovens, it was all old things. And as Betsy used to say, I'm sorry for deviating, she said, Reg, I'm just a little old lady on Delphine. That's all it was. She was so humble, so kind, I may have mentioned this, so humble, so kind, and had a hell of a good sense of humor.
Well, that's important,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes.
I think that should go to that list that your friend
Of Jerry
made up.
Parentios.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good sense of humor.
And she would, we had a phone in my guest house, and when I'd hear a buzz on it, it was sort of like the bat phone to me. When that buzz came through, it was Betsy. And she'd always call me Reg. Reg, come look at this. Reg, come look at this. And sometimes my old girlfriend, Jean Dickinson, may pick up the phone, and she'd ask where I was, and then, of course, I'd jump very quickly. And it was an experience, Joe. It was an experience. It was an honor.
I'll tell you,
to
Reggie, you're a great guy. I could
thank you.
speak to you for hours. We will have to have you back. But I must say thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. And we only heard just a little tiny bit, but thank you.
I'm very blessed, and I appreciate you having me here.